Civil war in Western deep state intensifies with mass arrests in Washington, D.C., firefights in California. The power struggle in undeclared civil war at the top of Western secret government intensified radically during the past week, with mass arrests of Khazarian gangsters around the United States and elsewhere. Multiple sources concur. There was also a declaration by U.S. President Donald Trump recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel in a move that is not what it seems. First, though, we need to look at the extremely unusual events taking place in California. These days, the citizens of that state must be feeling like the Solomon Islander did during the World War II, when the Japanese and Americans fought on their land. There is now very strong evidence that energy weapons like lasers are being used by opposing factions in California, agreed Pentagon and NSA sources. The heat is on as the Bel Air fire in Los Angeles targets the Getty Torpedo underground base, while the fire in San Diego apparently targets U.S. Marine base Camp Pendleton, note Pentagon sources. Videos have emerged showing what appear to be laser beams coming from the sky and setting up fires. Furthermore, buildings are being completely destroyed by fire, while trees standing next to them are unharmed. What we are witnessing is the hunting down of members of a Khazarian faction in California that has been systematically sacrificing and torturing children as well as eating their flesh, say White Dragon Society source. We understand that this is so horrific that it's hard for many of us to believe. Some readers wrote claiming that an article we cited last week in which Hollywood director and actor Mel Gibson talks about Hollywood outlets eating baby flesh was disinformation. It is true that we did not confirm it ourselves with Mel Gibson. However, so-called mainstream news organizations like the New York Times are now reporting that U.S. Justice Department is investigating the eugenics organization Planned Parenthood for selling the flesh and organs of aborted babies. The Khazarian Santanists who carry out such activities have ruled us for so long that they feel safe publicly displaying their symbols all over the world. For example, the Bank of Japan building, constructed in 1882, has a family crest over its main gate and a side entrance. As you can see from the photographs below, the crest belongs to the Khazarian royal families. The two lines are hieratic marks known as the Lion of Judah, meaning the people displaying this mark claim to be descended from King David. The mark in the middle is the Eye of Horus, the same one we see at the top of the so-called US $1 bill. In other words, Japan is run by Khazarian Santanist world headquarters in Switzerland. The Japanese royal family, by the way, used the chrysanthemum as its mark, so it is not for them. A spokesperson for the BOG said, "Our official stand is that we do not know what that crest means." Despite the BOG's obfuscation, there is plenty of evidence Japan has been a Khazarian Zionist colony since 1863. The latest comes from sources at Pentagon who say that when many equal rocket man equal fat boy, the real rocket man is Elon Musk of SpaceX, which was funded by former President Barack Obama to arm North Korea. It is no wonder the Israel-Mossad connected information disinformation site Debcar bragged every time the Khazarian North Korean proxy set off a missile or nuclear weapon. This evidence has come out because former U.S. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld has flipped it after being confronted with proof that a company on which he was on the board of directors supplied North Korea with the technology needed to make plutonium the essential ingredient of nuclear weapons, Pentagon sources say. Rumsfeld was a Navy captain, and his flipping along with former Marine Special Prosecutor Robert Mueller would take down draft-dodging former Vice President Dick Cheney, the Bushes, and Israel for the 11th September and other crimes, the sources say. On the day before 11 September, Rumsfeld also famously said that $2.3 trillion went missing from the Pentagon budget. Well, now the Department of Defense is under an unprecedented audit to cut waste, fraud, abuse, and recover missing trillions from the deep state, the sources say. Congress is also under pressure to pass legislation to audit the Federal Reserve Board. To help make this happen, the U.S. Congress and Senate are undergoing a purge that so far has claimed over 30 congressmen and senators. They have been told to either resign or go to jail. The recent resignations of Senate Al Prevert Franken, as well as Congressman John Converse and Trent Franks, will soon be followed by many others, the sources say. There is also a continuing purge of Trump administration. It's the end of the Jared Kushner faction, as Goldmanite globalist leaker and Jared snitch Dinah Powell is out of the White House, and Goldmanite Gary Cohn is next, the sources say. Kushner himself may be indicted for acting as an unregistered agent for Israel and other violations, since Trump finds it hard to fire his own son-in-law, the Pentagon sources say. The November 18 Marine raid on CIA headquarters has also clearly put an end to Operation Mockingbird, as corporate media outlets like The Washington Post, The New York Times, Bloomberg, ABC, CNN, and others have been forced to issue corrections and apologize, usually for anti-Trump stories. They are also now being forced to report the truth about such things as the selling of baby flesh by Planned Parenthood. By the way, to clarify about the Marine raid on the CIA, what we are now hearing is that the Marines were deployed in a show of force at two airbases, about 180 miles away from the CIA's Langley headquarters. This was enough to convince the CIA to let Marine intelligence enter the compound and seize computers, the sources say. As a result, a purge of Justice Department, the courts, and the FBI has now begun, the Pentagon sources say. In any case, Pentagon strategists say their entire approach to taking down the cabal is a military one. That means they started by cutting off the listening posts and taking down low-level frontline troops. In the case of Khazarians, it meant taking down the MF-13 gangsters, low-level prosecutors, and pimps for the pedophiles and similar criminals. These people were then forced to point out who their bosses were. All of this move seemed to fly in the face of Trump's recognition last week of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. This had led many people around the world to think Trump was a Zionist agent after all. However, Pentagon sources say it was a calculated move to incite global hatred for Israel in order to take down the Khazarian cabal. The sources pointed out that the U.S. still refuses to recognize the city of Jerusalem as passports, maps, and official documents. The moving of U.S. embassy to Jerusalem is not going to happen. The actual implementation of Trump's order does not take effect for 6 months. A lot will happen between now and May 2018, according to CIA source. This CIA source, who is Jewish, notes that the Vatican owns Jerusalem to this day. The P3 Freemason Lodge, which controls the Vatican, is clearly up to something big for sure. When I visited their headquarters, they told me they planned their big social engineering events around the movement of celestial bodies. On the front, we are in the midst of a cycle of 3 supermoons. The first was December 3rd. The next 2 are generally the 1st and 31st. The one on January the 31st will be a supermoon, a blue moon, and will also feature a lunar eclipse. This is also the U.S. government's tax payment deadline date. One guess may be that the Khazarians, who still control much of the financial system, will cut off all payments of salary to U.S. military and other government personnel on that date. The U.S. agency white hats might want to make contingency plans. The other thing to note is that while the most chaotic activity worldwide is now in the U.S., the EU may be about to hit a new patch of turbulence. Chinese and Russian military are poised to retake the Libya's oil fields from the mercenaries hired by French, British, and Italian factions of Khazarian mob. The rest of Africa may follow. The U.S. military is standing by on this one, so without Libyan oil and African resources at pennies to the dollar, the EU and Euro will be facing serious financial turbulence. Also, speaking about the financial system, the Khazarians who own the central banks have seen their printing of money create ultimately doom bubbles in the stock and bond markets. That is why a lot of this hot money is now fleeing into cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, which is why its value is skyrocketing. This may be a bubble, but bubbles can go off many times over before they pop. Even if when the bubble pops, in the long run, blockchains definitely do represent a technical improvement. It is likely replace much of the current financial architecture. It's also interesting to note that countries that have physical gold, like Russia, China, India, and Indonesia, are against Bitcoin. Those that do not, such as Japan and the US, are rushing into it. While you cannot eat Bitcoin, you can't eat gold either. At the end of the day, the White Dragon Society expects these two factions will be forced to recognize that the ultimate currency is life itself. Right now, the Earth life is under attack and humanity needs to unite in order to save the planet.